Hello everyone, I'm Jeff Peterson of the Facebook page With the Individuals. Alongside me is my co-admin, Robert Erickson. Plus a special shout out to SpeakLibertyNow.com, who will, I believe, be posting this later. Now, today is what you would call a maiden voyage for interviews, as this is my first one. But today we have a very special guest. Now, for many, he needs no introduction, but for those who don't know him, he has written such books as Bourbon for Breakfast, Living Outside the Statist Quo, which came out in 2010. It's a Jetson's World, Private Miracles and Public Crimes in 2011. And A Beautiful Anarchy, How to Create Your Own Civilization in the Digital Age. He's also written several articles for LouRockwell.com and Mises.org, where he was editor from 97 till 2011, when he joined Laissez-Faire Books as the executive editor. Ladies and gentlemen, the distinguished Jeffrey Tucker.
It's good to be here. Thank you so much for having me. We're hanging out in a hotel room, actually.
Yes,
right?
we are.
Yeah. I mean, this is the last place we expected to find ourselves.
Exactly. Too much construction going on everywhere.
No, but it's fun. I mean, first of all, Salt Lake is a beautiful city, right?
Yeah, it is very nice.
Love it.
And I always have the sense when I come to Salt Lake of just the omnipresence of the commercial ethos. And, you know, I mean, there's a driving, the pulse here, the heartbeat of Salt Lake is commerce. Really.
It is. And
I love that about the city. I mean, you just feel it everywhere, you know?
Especially with City Creek Center,
Yeah.
It's
the City Creek, you have the trains and...
No, and also, you know, in absence of capitalism and of markets and private property and entrepreneurship, what would be here? Right?
Exactly.
I mean, just like nothing.
Yeah,
right?
the Mormons who settled the valley, like, they made a desert into a bustling metropolis.
And what do you think about these wide streets, huh? Is that great?
Actually, one story behind that is one of the prominent leaders of the church actually said that when carriages went down, he wanted the streets wide enough that the carriages could make a U-turn.
Right, and what were the carriages doing?
That's
commerce.
Commerce.
They're carrying stuff to people.
Exactly, free trade.
So even the structure, even the infrastructure of the city is all about serving people through free markets. You know?
Exactly.
And it's everywhere. You feel it, and it still survives here. I mean, I have to say, I've been a lot of places in the world. I love Salt Lake. I mean, I just love being here. Yeah.
I'm flattered.
You don't actually hear that much from people about Salt Lake City.
Yeah, but I mean, even looking outside the window, all the big the buildings are all private. You know, there is one post office, you know, not far from here.
Right.
You know about the post office?
A couple blocks away from here.
Right, and it's a kind of a, what would you say, early 20th century kind of construction?
It looks like it was, pretty much. I mean,
so it's got these big fake columns, you know, and the eagle sticking out, you know, and they have all night. Have you been by there? There's always a guard. There's a guard there all the time. What used to be, I think, used to be the courthouse, now it's the post office. So they have an old guy just kind of standing there. He's always a nice guy, and he's guarding the big public building, you know. You look at that and you think, you know, this is what government used to be. It used to be the big respected thing,
right?
You know, the biggest thing in town. You know, the thing that was supposed to be the center of our lives. Now it's just a kind of, even in Salt Lake, it's a historical curiosity, an architectural, you know, sort of anachronism, and we look at it and think, oh, that's what it used to be. You know, that's what life used to be like. Government was the ruler of everything, and now look at the world. I mean, what rules Salt Lake today? I mean, it's the restaurants, it's the banks, you know, it's the people trading money, you know, and it's the private associations, the churches, you know, they're all rooted in private property and human volition too. So this big structure of the post office courthouse is kind of an illusion in a way. It's a symbol of a time gone by. You know?
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
So the first question I had was
sorry to go off on that.
Oh, no. It was fine. It was awesome.
My first question, I'm sure you've answered many times, was, you know, about, you know, how you became an anarchist. And one thing I wanted to point out before asking was the viewers, so at least they had an idea of how long it's been part of your life, was that, you know, I came across a video of you on Adam Kokesh, where you're in a play which was about Ayn Rand, which had Murray Rothbard in the crowd. So obviously it's been in your life for quite a long time. But, you know, I just kind of wanted to get It's not an overnight transition,
No.
but nonetheless, what things, what books, what life events kind of put you on the path towards anarchism?
So I, when I was in college at Howard Payne, I was in a private program, with mostly private tutors. We had 2 or 3 people, 4 or 5 sometimes per class, and I got convinced of free enterprise, which enraptured me. But this was the days of the Cold War, really.
Yeah.
And all the people who believed in free enterprise also believed in like a global war against the commies.
Yeah.
I mean, like, y'all don't know about this, but it was, and the people who were against like nuclear war, like I'm against nuclear war, they also tended to be socialist, So, it was a strange time, but I kind of accepted the normal paradigm at the time. Like, I was against this professor because he was sort of pro-commie. I was for this professor because he, liked Reagan and free enterprise. And it takes a real step to kind of break out of that and go, oh, the existing options that have been given to me by my civic culture are just kind of bogus.
False dichotomy.
Yeah. And you have to kind of, and you realize, oh, these are kind of prepackaged things. It's a little like buying, Old Danish from a candy machine or something. Like, you press Republican, you get the thing out and you eat it. And that's the way most people, I think, even now, take their political ideology. They just kind of go along with whatever. So I broke out of that really as early as college, but I remember I got interested in various radical alternatives, and among which is anarchism. And I saw in my professor's wall a book called Man, Economy, and State. I thought, I'm interested in all 3 of those things. Man, Economy, and State. Is that a good book? And especially it's big, so I naturally thought it was important.
Yeah.
And he said, "Don't read that." He said, "Don't read Rothbard. He's an anarchist." And I mean, that's a great way to get a student interested.
Exactly.
Right?
Like, whoa.
Yeah. I thought, wow, a book I'm not supposed to read about it. Something I'm not supposed to be. So I read it. I read it, and it had a huge influence on me. But I still think that even then, it was a few years before I finally decided I was an anarchist. And I tell you, the Cold War was a big issue at the time. Because if you think that the world outside of you is just surrounded by enemies who want to get you at any moment, right? And the only thing standing between you and, the atheistic communists coming and taking over your hometown is the government.
Right.
You're going to be loyal to the government in some way.
Yeah.
It's the same reason Rapunzel, was devoted to her mother. She kept her in the tower.
Stockholm Syndrome.
I was about to say, Stockholm
said,
Syndrome.
I know you're not so happy in this tower combing your hair day in and day out. It's kind of miserable. But look, I mean, outside the tower, it's terrible out there. I mean, you'll hate it. There's just enemies everywhere. And so she couldn't, get up the nerve to step out. So at some point, I was Rapunzel who left the tower. And I realized
Let down your long hair?
Yeah, I let down my long hair. My friends know. So, no, you finally get rid of the illusions. You realize, well, the state's telling me a lot of lies.
Yeah.
And so you take that step towards anarchism, but if I'm sorry, but taking too long to answer this question, but I have to tell you very quickly, because I was in a hotel lobby, and I think, all of us go through big dramas to become an anarchist, because it means it means stopping believing in something you've been always taught to believe in.
Yeah.
And embracing something that nobody you know believes in, except for some weird intellectuals out there you've never met.
Right.
So it's a big it's a big emotional, intellectual step to go, okay,
definitely.
I don't believe in the state anymore. I don't believe in it. I think society could work fine without it. So I finally came to the conclusion, basically concluding that, look, there's nothing that the state does that needs to be done that the market couldn't do better. And a lot of what the state does, the market wouldn't do, and that's a good thing because it doesn't need to be done at all.
Exactly.
And when I came to that conclusion, I realized, okay, I'm an anarchist. So I was with Murray at a hotel lobby or something, and I presented this to him. I said, now, here's basically what I've concluded. And I presented what I just said to you. And he said, well, Jeffrey, that means you're an anarchist. And I said, well, then I'm an anarchist. And he jumped up, and he grabbed my hand, and he shook it really hard, and he said, congratulations, Jeffrey, congratulations. So, it's funny because, Murray understood that it's a big moment when this happens to you. And so he wanted to, because I think ultimately, from Murray's point of view, in the end, you weren't really trustworthy until you let go of whatever myth you hold about the state. And once you let go, then you're in.
Yeah,
you're ready to go. Right.
Myself, I've actually been libertarian my entire life, but mainly in limited government. I've never been liberal or conservative.
Right.
But after the Ron Paul revolution, it introduced me to even more ideas, and then eventually, I still believed, we need government for the police, for the courts, for the military, and I came across some people on Facebook, and we started talking, and I started reading more. But then I realized that, once you have taxes and someone who could benefit from that, you're going to have an endless excuse to expand government. Yeah. And then reading more literature from you, from Rothbard and Hoppe, then I just realized it's something that can be done by the free market. And then it comes down to if you believe in coercion or not. And I don't want it to make it seem so black and white. Right. But even for things like that, as seen as a necessity, it to me came down to coercion or not. And then one day, just the same thing happened. I was like, at first I was like, no, maybe I'm not an anarchist. Then one day I was like, I'm an anarchist.
Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes I think different people are persuaded by different things. I mean, the ethical, moral element that you mentioned is obviously very important to people like Stefan Molyneux, and all of his listeners, and I think for Rothbard too. I mean, it's important to all of us. But which comes first? The moral sense or the practical sense? I'm not entirely sure. For me, I was really concerned that without the state, the world would just fall apart.
Yeah.
And
like
to be
most
fair,
people's concern.
yeah, I mean, all the classical liberals believe this.
Yeah.
I mean, like with Mises, ultimately, he was a Hobbesian. There was this weird sense of, I know the government's terrible. Most all evil in the world is perpetuated by the government.
Yeah.
The major problem we have is the state, but without it, God knows what would happen. There's that overwhelming sense that even if we can't a sense of dread. Like I may not be able to explain it, but I just have a sense when you look out there, things look very orderly and very, very beautiful in a way. But if there weren't cops on the beat, if there weren't taxes to collect, if there weren't courts, then maybe none of this would actually exist. I think actually among all the Austrians, before Rothbard obviously, who really got this, Hayek stands out in my mind, because if you read his reflections on the nature of the social order and like how it works and how it comes to be, he doesn't really have a role for the state in the functioning of society. I mean, he really struggled to find an organic explanation for why things are ordered. Like, why are we sitting down here in a sort of wonderful way having this conversation, on this brand new kind of gizmo? Why does this equipment exist? Why does this hotel exist? The Hayekian desire was to explain why this exists in absence of an imposed central plan. And I think he came up with an anarchistic-like explanation, even though he himself never, of course, embraced anarchism. But I think his explanation for why society works, I find very compelling, because he really seeked to explain it without, that he let go, I think, of the myth of the state ultimately in his explanation, which is a beautiful thing. Even though he himself couldn't embrace anarchism, he always said he was too old.
Well, that's why I noticed in seeing some interviews with him, he always seems logically sound up to a point, but then he kind of starts defending the state. And...
Oh well, he's terrible in his specifics. I mean, he has all this endorsement of pension plan, state provided pension plans, and I mean, on all the specifics, he's terrible. But I think it's an illustration of how we should always look at thinkers and remember that no one person has the completed doctrine and catechism and perfect view that you just have to adopt. In fact, if they did, there wouldn't be any reason for us to think about anything. You just take the pill and that's it. I mean, I think what we should be doing is not just we should sample from as many people as possible, learn from whomever we can, but then also strive to make improvements of our own. I mean, all of us have an interesting take on the world that's unlike anybody else's. It's very possible that you will discover an idea that nobody put together ideas in a way that nobody else ever has before that will benefit other people.
It's true.
Yeah.
And to me, that's another testament to the beauty of anarchy because, you know, people just, you know, like reading other thinkers or discussing with you and then coming up with new ideas, even you saying ideas and then someone else just thinking of it differently. And then,
it's true. You know, ideas never exit the mind the same way they came in.
Exactly.
That's a very interesting point, you know, because it should speak to our job as libertarians, really. We have to remember that the human mind, every individual processes information in different ways. So there's many different ways in and out of the human mind. Yeah. We always have to be open to that. And remember who we're talking to and why. And I always like to think of every person I talk to as a potential convert to pure anarchist theory. You know? In fact, most people conduct their lives as if they're anarchists. I mean, people aren't calling on the state. In fact, most people dread the state.
Yeah.
You know, most people are practical anarchists. So if you can tap into that, you know, yeah.
I didn't realize that. Okay, so I had a question.
Okay.
So obviously I knew you were Catholic, and when I found out about that, I was surprised and excited to hear it because, like, a lot of the, you know, people in libertarian community, especially the anarchists, are also atheists or agnostic. So I heard you were Catholic. I was like, yeah, another Christian, you know, because I'm Mormon, I'm LDS. So I was like, man, I'm not alone in this. But some of my friends have, you know, brought up concerns about, you know, well, in the Bible it's taught that you know, Jesus said, pay your taxes, and they reference that render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's.
Right.
And I mean, obviously, my explanation is it was interpreted differently. I saw something, I think it was on Lou Rockwell, I think someone else wrote about it. But I guess my question is, how do you reconcile your like anarchist, voluntarist beliefs with like Christian?
Well, yeah, that's just a gigantic question. But
yeah,
what, you know. Well, let me say first of all that whether you're a theist or an atheist or whatever is, to me, very much of a personal matter.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't have any objection to anybody's opinions about this. Like, I'm not prepared to argue with an atheist, you know, about you know, at all, because I think faith is in many ways a gift or a curse, depending on how you look at it, right? But yeah. So, but and I can only speak to the Catholic case, I suppose, but I have maybe a romantic attachment to Catholicism because it's an old body of ideas that extends beyond any existing state, which is very lovely, and any existing geographical, you know, span. So I have a irrational attachment to Gregorian chant, for example, because it's this music that's been around for 2,000 years or even more, that somehow has been transmitted by, you know, human action only. And that's a great thing, you know, that I can sit here and sing a melody that was sung in the 6th century. I mean, no state made that possible. I mean, that's weird. Very true. And that's exciting to me. The other thing is that, I don't know if either of you ever read Rousseau?
Yes. A little bit. Yeah.
Okay, so Rousseau is very worried about, in particular, the Christians, because he doesn't find them civilizable. In a way, because he says, you know, they never buy into this whole social contract thing. They've got this sort of they have this. They imagine that God's telling them things, and no matter how much, you know, society is telling them to do things, they continue to sort of persist in their own ways. You know, so they're really a danger, and that attracts me.
The danger to the state.
We're always the danger. In American history, of course, the Catholics have always been denounced, you know, as being secret revolutionaries that, like, were plotting to overthrow the state, you know, and, like, put a pope up or whatever.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
Right. That's right. So, yeah, I am plotting to overthrow the state. I don't want the pope to replace it, though.
Yeah.
That's
exactly.
Yeah, but the old slogan about Catholics is that we believe in Romanism, and rebellion. So I'm good with that. Yeah, that's okay.
I like that.
Sorry for such a superficial answer. But
No.
Another question is that there's a quote that is pretty viral about you and Rand Paul about the reduction of the states. I myself can't agree more, because I don't think that there is one dictated way that we should reduce the state, as long as it's peaceful and it's a positive way. Right. That being said, though, are you an outside the system type of guy, or more are you more for doing it within the system? And
I think you know that. I mean, I can't.
For those that don't know,
systems, you know, you always toy with the idea. Maybe all of us do, right? Like, let's say you get the call tomorrow. We want you to come to work for the Department of Treasury. We think you have some very interesting ideas we'd like to implement in government, right? And you ask yourself, what would I do? You know,
right?
So, but I know that it would never work for me. Never. Systems don't work for me. So I don't really even believe from experience that this whole political reform movement is really very viable at all. In fact, I think it's mostly a distraction. You know, what democracy does is it creates this illusion of participation, you know. And it's a little, I compared it in the past to Hunger Games, which I think is beautiful. So here they are slaughtering these kids, right? But they get the masses involved in cheering, you know, and involved in creating it like a sport, but it's actually a ghastly, destructive, murderous thing. But it's very difficult to step outside that system and say, you know what, this whole racket is evil. You know, but the games themselves, what's the purpose of the games? I mean, the games are to get people involved in sort of patriotism, cheering for their guy against somebody else's guy, heralding the heroism of the winners, and you know, that sort of thing. Democracy is very much like that, and I think the anarchist ultimately has to step outside that and say, you know what, I'm just not going to involve myself in this whole system because it makes me part of the problem, really. So I don't want to fault Rand Paul. I think he's sincere. I really do, and I've known him for many years. I've known him since he was actually quite young, as I was when I first met him. And it's charming for me to see him as a senator. I think he's quite brilliant, and I think he has every intention of pushing the system towards, on the margin towards liberty. And maybe I'm wrong. And we could look back at history and say, Rand Paul saved the world. But I don't believe it.
Yeah, I myself, when Ron Paul was around, I was for Ron Paul reducing the system. But looking back, I think it's more of his message other than him wanting to be in office and do it. And sometimes I'll hear the...
Of course. You're exactly right. Ron was always an educator. You know what I mean? That was his main thing. I mean, he is. I mean, that's his goal. I mean, he wants to spread the knowledge.
Yeah.
And he used public office for that purpose. It was never really about taking power for Ron. Not that his followers ever, his most passionate followers ever really understood that. I mean, sometimes in the middle of that campaign, I just had flashbacks to the movie Life of Brian. You know, I'm not the Messiah, you know. I mean, Ron never wanted to be anybody's Messiah.
Yeah,
you know?
And that's what I always liked about him, because he always said things, and, you know, like, especially when I was just starting out getting into politics, you know, he said things like the Federal Reserve and, you know, devaluing currency and stuff like that. And I was like, well, what does this mean? Then that, like, either you ignore it and you just keep spewing rhetoric from, you know, one of the two, like, sides, or you think, well, hey, maybe I should look this up, and that's what really got me on the road to liberty.
Well, you know, it's funny because I got interested in politics back. It's weird how history keeps repeating itself, but I got interested in politics. I mean, incredibly, it was in 1984. So yeah, right. And Ron was running for a Senate seat, I think, and I think he was running for a Senate seat in Texas, and he was interested in the gold standard, and I wrote my undergraduate thesis on the gold standard. So I began to kind of campaign for him, but I lost the taste for this stuff very quickly afterwards. You know, that was like my one time. I think politics in America serves as a sort of a gateway drug, and in a way that's regrettable. But look, it gets people's attention, and I think that's why Ron looked at it, was like, this gets people's attention and it brings guys like you along. But I think also there's an expectation there that, okay, now you've done the first thing. Now let's move on. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't move on. They just kind of get stuck.
When I look back on it, and when I look back, when the main objection that I hear is, yeah, but this time it'll work. Yeah, but this time we'll get the right guy.
You know, you read H.L. Mencken in the 1920s. He's making fun of people even back then. You know, he's like, oh, here we go with another president that, you know, candidate's going to save us all. So it's been going on a long time. But people, every new generation They buy into it again.
Well, I like what you said about it being like a gateway. Once you get, that's the first step, and then you kind of move on to the next one.
Right. So the only thing I would say about that quote where I said, look, I'm not interested in saint making or witch burning. So I get a little bit annoyed at, maybe it's a Facebook culture and internet culture in general. It's like every day, here's somebody we have to hit, some body that we have to either adore or somebody that we have to like hate. There's the good, there's evil. Well, that's typically not the case, and it was bugging me that people were writing me saying, how dare you say nice things? Because like when Rand Paul says good things, I'm going to praise him.
He's right.
And that statement was correct.
I mean, come on, this is good. And then people write me, oh, how dare you say it because he's actually evil? Well, you don't know that he's evil, actually. It's the system that's evil. I don't know about Rand in particular.
Yeah.
There's a Manichaeanism alive in the libertarian world that I find a little tedious, I mean, look, the way to be a libertarian, it seems to me, is to always remember that the enemy is the state. That's the most important thing to remember. And if you can remember that and like focus on that every day, then that's good. It's not your next door neighbor. It's not, the person sitting next to you in the church who disagrees with you on politics. That's not your enemy. The enemy is not the the lady downstairs who just served me a glass of wine or whatever, nice immigrant from Mexico or whatever. Those are not enemies. The enemy is the state.
Exactly.
All the rest, all of society, the rest of society we can deal with.
Yeah.
It's the state that's the problem. That's a good thing to remember.
It is, definitely. I had a question about, I had brought up to you earlier. I think it was a few months ago, actually, I, read up on intellectual property and, got into the discussion with, I watched video with Kinsella and, is it Wenzel?
Yeah.
And that one where... That one was hilarious.
But I can't believe Kinsella actually agreed to do that.
I know.
I'm actually glad he did. I mean, he asked me to show it, and I said, well, I wouldn't recommend it, but he went ahead with it anyway.
Yeah.
But it was a good chance for him to kind of. One of the things about intellectual property, this whole debate, is it's hard to find competent interlocutors, actually, like people who advocate intellectual property, who make any sense at all.
Yeah.
So I'm always glad to encounter somebody who favors intellectual property so they can give me some decent argument. I'm always hoping to hear one.
And I always give the argument like, intellectual property, with a guaranteed patent on, say, like drugs in the pharmaceutical industry, it encourages innovation because otherwise they'd make the drug, then the other companies would reverse engineer it, and then they wouldn't make any money, and it would destroy all of the motive. That's one thing I hear a lot.
Right.
And then, and applying that. I was just wondering, could you talk about your, we were talking about earlier with music and the Catholic Church, because that actually, when you were talking about that, I was like, well, that's actually a direct answer.
Well, let me just quickly tell you, the pharmaceutical point is what you just said is empirically incorrect, as you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just wrong that it encourages innovation. I mean, every possible amount of empirical data we can gather from all of history, most of the drug innovations have happened in countries with very low or non-existent patents, and the patents actually freeze things in place. And we see this every day in this country. I don't want to go on about that because we could talk about it all day. But quickly, let me just summarize what I'm doing next week. So next week I've been invited to the Vatican because I was responsible for putting all the chant online. I mean, so Gregorian chant is like this gigantic body of stuff. Like if you put all the rock and roll together, it would be like 1% of all the Gregorian chant.
Really?
Yeah, there's a
lot of it.
Huge. So I put saying about, I have in my paper I have all the dates. I don't even remember now. Maybe it was 5-6 years ago. I put all the chant online because I was tired of people writing me saying, "Can I sing this chant?" Because I'm afraid of being like sued. I was like, what the hell is wrong with you? This stuff was written like in the 5th century.
He's gonna come out of his grave and like
so
demand his royalties.
So I got sick of it, so I just put it all online. And what? How dare you do this? And it was very funny. I got threats, and I'm like, to hell with you, and it was kind of a big deal. But anyway, the point is that within the next year, we began to see books coming out of chant and big Gregorian chants. Choirs start and apps, on your iPhone you could like browse Gregorian chants and everything.
Yeah.
And so I was at a bar one night with a fairly high church official, and I am not one, but he was one. And so I kind of used the opportunity because I had my iPhone and I had my Gregorian chant app. And I said, Jeff, look at this. And he said, what is that? And I said, well, that's Gregorian chant. Some guy made an app out of all the chants I uploaded online. He said, well, how are you doing that? And I said, we can just download it. It's like, it's like $10. And it was like his mouth fell on the floor. He just couldn't believe it.
That's awesome.
That there's this remix had happened. Right. And I said, that's just the beginning, Father. I mean, there are like, 1,000 YouTubes now. And anyway, my point is that there were people within the publishing apparatus of the church that were so amazed at, the results of putting something in the commons, because it's just the beginning of creativity, right? It's got to be in the commons, and then it's unlocked, it's free like a bird. Anyway, this paper I'm delivering next week is about my experiences with putting Gregorian chant in the commons, and I'm hoping to push publishers in this realm of life into a kind of what I consider to be a more free market model. So I'm kind of excited about that. It's actually a wicked thing. What happened was that obviously chant and all music was pretty much in the commons up until the late 19th century. And then we got international copyright rules and everything was locked down. It's just like all music was put in prison. So the only innovations we saw in music in the 20th century were, for the most part, these kind of radical movements that were just like, to hell with the establishment. So bebop and rock, come out of that, and jazz to a large extent, and those were the innovative things. But the serious music in the classical world, it was pretty stodgy and pretty unimpressive, actually, and that's because of copyright, I would say. So in the 21st century, we're seeing copyright break down, and we're actually starting to see real innovation take place in the world of music. And I think it's so cool now. I mean, pop songs come out, and like within days, there's remixes all over the place on YouTube. And they try to enforce this stuff, but even they can't enforce it, despite all the apparatus. I mean, remix culture, we are seeing today a restoration of the prevailing model of music distribution that has been with us essentially since the ancient world up until about 1880s. I mean, we're seeing a reversion to a beautiful model of sharing and remixing, and that's what accounts for the wonderful things that are going on in our world. It's the smashing of the IP machine.
Right? Yeah, that actually answers a follow-up question I had about how you think intellectual property affects music. Because I myself, I love music. I was thinking about majoring in music. Actually, I took like AP music theory classes in high school, and I play guitar and piano. And so I was actually going to ask you about how you think IP affects music and the quality. Because me personally, I love rock and metal, but I have a background in classical music. Sure. That's what I grew up on, and like classical music and like Irish folk and stuff like that. And so, and I always realized that the older music had more more to it than more modern pop music that just. Kind of, but do you
remember this movement, this piece from Brahms? I think maybe it was Third Symphony. It goes something like da 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 dum da da dum da da dum bum bum rum ta. It's just great, right? Okay, so Mahler comes along, and I think it meant, what symphony would that be? But I think maybe it was 8. Okay, so we're talking about so maybe 1905, 1910.
All right.
Bum 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 bum. Okay, so you took the major mode. I had to go through the minor third bit.
Okay.
Put it in minor.
Nice.
Okay, so it's a total borrowing.
Yeah.
That kind of thing happened throughout all of history. It's a very late example. But this is the way composers used to learn from each other. They'd take their stuff, and as a compliment, I would take your amazing theme and change it just a little bit.
Yeah.
Or for those that don't know the music, kind of like what Vanilla Ice did to Queen and David Bowie.
There you go.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah.
You don't need to research all this old stuff. Sorry about that. I have a weird frame of reference. I could have given an easier, more accessible example.
I kind of knew what you were talking about, but I didn't.
Sorry about that. But that's the way music is, right? You got to borrow.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So what happened to David Bowie and Queen? David Bowie borrowed Queen?
Actually, David Bowie and Queen did the song together, but then 89 or 90 comes out. Vanilla Ice does the dun 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 and copies it for his song Ice Ice Baby, which is very well known in pop culture.
Yeah.
But Vanilla Ice, because of IP laws and copyright, said, no, it's not the same because I have an extra ting in there, like ding 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 ting ding ding ding.
There's this one guitarist. I really like him.
You should be able to borrow from people, right?
There's this one guitarist I really like, Joe Satriani. He claimed that I forget which song of his and which song of theirs he was talking about, but he sued Coldplay because he thought that a chord progression of one of their songs was too close to one of his songs, and so he was suing them for, like copyright infringement of, because the chord progression was like the same except one chord off or something like that. And I mean,
it's just so silly.
When you think about it from the musical standpoint, there's only, 12 tones chromatically and only a certain amount of like chord progressions that you can use that sound good.
And there's only whole steps and half steps.
Yeah.
There's nothing else that exists. I mean, there's really essentially two things that all music is based on. Okay, there's whole steps, half steps, and noise.
Yeah.
That's it. All music in the world is based on those three things. So how can you, it's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. That's, anyways.
One big one is that you're noted for the quote of what's the difference between a minarchist and an anarchist?
Yeah.
6 months. Now,
did I say that? No.
I think it was you. Okay. At least you've quoted it once. Okay. And then now when speaking
I said it, I can take credit.
Now, when speaking to individuals about voluntarism or anarchism, there are many skeptics, and obviously many of those skeptics are libertarians themselves. Now, going from limited government libertarian to an anarchist is quite a journey, but I just want to know, what advice would you give current anarchists for talking to limited government libertarians and persuading them, and also vice versa? What advice would you give minarchists for talking to anarchists?
Yeah, it depends on how belligerent they are, right? I mean, at some point, a minarchist can be such a pain in the neck. You just kind of to heck with it. Right? But
I think an open mind has really the biggest thing that there is.
Yeah, to me, here's the thing: intellectual change is always a journey. Right? And I think we tend to get in a rush with people about things. So planting seeds is the most important thing, but those seeds have to have time to germinate. I always feel this way about the intellectual property issue. And whenever I talk about this issue in front of groups, I say, you know what? I don't think that hardly anybody here is going to agree with anything I say. And that's okay. I just want to kind of throw some things out there. And if it gets you thinking, and you find yourself tomorrow still annoyed slightly about what I'm saying, then I think I've done the right thing. Because as long as you're thinking about it, I think you're going to come to it. I think you're eventually going to agree with me.
Yeah.
And I agree with that, right? I actually believe that. So if you can kind of plant the idea in people's heads and not get impatient. Like, I think we might tend to want to follow through all the way with an argument with people, especially, I think, the younger we are. The more impatient we are for people to agree with us. But if you can just kind of plant a seed, I think the first step is being bold to call yourself an anarchist.
Right.
I mean, if you can just say, I'm an anarchist. They go, what?
Yeah.
This whole state thing, what does it even do? I mean, it just takes stuff and it annoys people and stops people from doing what they otherwise would do. I mean, how's that good? Okay, maybe that's all you say.
Yeah.
But in a few weeks, they're still going to be thinking about that. That guy who said this thing that made sense.
He said he was something crazy, and then he said something logical.
Yeah, right. And it's good. I think that, and have patience with people to come to the right conclusions.
Yeah.
I try not to get annoyed when people say ridiculously foolish things. It can be hard. But remember where people are starting out. And the brain is a funny thing, really. I think the human mind, we can only handle so much, radical information at one one sitting. You know,
Yeah.
and it takes us all a while. Have you ever had this experience where you have something happen to you that seems to spark a thought, but you're not sure what it is? You sleep on it, you wake up the next day, and then it's clear.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So it's the same thing when I think when you're debating with people.
That's true.
You know, sometimes it's good just to kind of put the ideas out there. Don't walk away from the conversation feeling like a loser. If you've caused them to seriously think, then that's good. Now, there are some people who don't want to think, you know, and that can be especially annoying. They're there to announce their position and defend it.
To fight.
That's fight.
It.
And that can be, you know, in that case, be the more thoughtful person.
There's a quote, I'm not sure who said it, but in the age of information, ignorance is a choice. And usually I've been guilty of whenever I discuss something with even a limited government libertarian, I want them like, oh, can't you see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So at least the best thing that I know, at least for advice to give other anarchists, is at least give them an idea of what a society could look like. And,
sure.
But then also, if you can tell that this person is going to be stubborn and stand their ground no matter what, then at that point, I give them literature to read and say, you know what, I've told you this.
Sure. Yeah.
Watch and read this.
Yeah.
And then at least they'll know, even if they don't read it, they had a good encounter, so at least that person is...
Well, you know, it's funny, as you're talking, I was just thought about one strategy. You could say, look, I know you reject anarchism, but when you wake up tomorrow, just do me a favor, and from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, think about how many times in the day you really found real, genuine productive use for the government in your life. How many times did that happen to you?
Except for the roads, obviously.
Yeah.
Well, you know, there's the road thing, but, you know, and then you could even add that, and you know, and did you experience anything in the civic culture that you think could not possibly be replaced by some kind of private thing? Just think about that. I really think we're doing our work if people are thinking.
Yeah.
This is what the state is all about. They're trying to shut down people's minds. I mean, I've described the state as a conspiracy, and I think it is. And the conspiracy is to stop us from thinking. You know? I mean, it's to close our minds and to stop us from... They want us to accept things by faith that aren't really true. That's what the state is all about. So they don't want you to think. I mean, this is why the NSA is spying on us. This is why they're because they want to ban certain thoughts. Free speech, if it is really allowed to prevail, will undermine any state, in any place, and any time. Yeah, that's why they don't like it.
That's I was watching this video the other day. Stefan Molyneux's his against me argument. You know, taking the concept of, you know, oh, you agree that I should have a certain opinion, right? So yeah, like. So
he's so good, isn't
logically,
he?
yeah, I love him. He's awesome.
I always learn from him whenever I'm with him. I love to hang out with him. It's always a little bit funny because you know, you mentioned your question earlier about theists and atheists, you know.
Yeah.
And Stefan is a very, I would say, passionate about his status as a non-believer.
Yeah.
Right. In fact, he thinks it's a critical aspect of human freedom itself, and you know, obviously, I don't agree with that, but it's funny when we're together because we feel almost like brothers. There's kind of a brotherly love between us. You know, I love hanging out with him for this reason, and we get over what would otherwise be the atheist-theist tension by I make anti-Catholic jokes and he makes anti-atheist jokes, and it works out. That's funny.
That's great. All right. Another question I had was. If I asked this one about Bitcoin.
Yeah, let's do Bitcoin.
I knew you'd be excited about this one.
Yeah.
I guess, like, I mean, there's so many ways I could go with this, but one thing I was wondering was, like, one criticism that people have is, well, it's only used to buy drugs on the internet, like on the deep web. So, you know, and then of course they don't know of other places where you can actually use it for.
Right.
And so I guess one thing they say is, well, you only use it for drugs on the internet, so it would never catch on in real life.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, one thing to say about that is, first of all, it's a good thing for them to be used for drugs because drug markets are violent markets because drugs are illegal, and that leads to unjust violence and a lot of bloodshed. Bitcoin actually brings peace to this world, so we should actually favor the use of Bitcoins in the drugs world. in the drug world. That would be good because people save lives. I mean, the people are going to use drugs. People are going to distribute drugs and make them. Okay, that's just a fact. Like, deal with it. So if that's going to happen, better that it happen at lower social cost overall and saving lives. And Bitcoin actually improves that. Because the most violence associated with drugs have to do with the exchanging of the money. So Bitcoin transfers that property in no time, brings peace to the world. Silk Road is a bringer of peace. So that's just a fact. So I very much am in favor of Bitcoin being used in drug markets. I think that would be a benefit for everybody, especially me. I'm not big into the kind of drugs you buy on Silk Road. I'm into the kind of drugs you can buy at the liquor store. But
poison a choice.
Yeah, right. So I think we should. The other thing is that it takes edgier markets to innovate. Typically, in a world of disgusting convention where everybody's attached to status quos all the time. People just happy to go along with their things. It takes edgy, revolutionary, risk-driven people to actually push the world forward. That's why I think we have to be champions of the vagabonds and the pornographers and the drug dealers and all the rebels in the world, because they actually bring us progress.
Walter Block, defending the undefendable.
Yeah, sure. And I think they serve a social function. They're testing things out, perfecting things before it gets to the rest of us mere bourgeoisie.
Now, do you think? Because I'll admit I haven't read a lot into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I'm pretty new on it. I've read some of your articles on it and such. But do you think that Bitcoin, because right now it's Bitcoin US dollar, it seems, but do you think Bitcoin could be the gateway for more currencies that could come out? Or
well, actually, I think Americans are going to be the very last people in the world to understand Bitcoin. There's vast swaths of humanity that are cut out of the matrix of exchange right now because of the credit card system, which ultimately relies on banks and trust, and anti-fraud measures have really made it impossible for most Africans and a lot of Latin Americans to buy and sell anything, in the world. And it's really cruel. I remember when I was the manager of the Mises store, you're in a position as a store owner to block IP addresses, from being able to buy your stuff. And very quickly you discover that there's a lot of fraudsters in Nigeria. And you can spend your life, getting orders from Nigeria and having to charge back everything, and so you end up blocking out IP addresses. Well, this is kind of cruel. I remember feeling at the time, I'm going to block this IP range. Well, you're excluding everybody in that IP range from being able to access your products just because they have bad neighbors, right? Well, it turns out that like a third of humanity is in this situation now, excluded from access to the matrix of exchange. Why is this? Because our money is crappy. Because it's bound up with individual identity, which is ridiculous. I mean, there's no reason why my desire to spend dollars should also involve my having to cough up my credibility and to trust the person. Yeah. So the point is that Bitcoin eliminates this whole system and makes it possible again to exchange money just like physical property, as it always was before central banks were involved, and before money became bound up with our personhood. Right. So as a result, Africans love Bitcoin. Latin America.
Wow, I didn't know it went that far.
Yeah, no. If you decide to move to Argentina and rent an apartment, you better have Bitcoin, because that's
really
you can go to the public sites now and look at it. I mean, Google apartments in Buenos Aires, and you will see you'll see that they're all priced in Bitcoin because that's what people want. And it's true in Ghana, in Africa. I was just on a call the other day with a guy who's buying some Bitcoin. I mean, it's a big deal all over the world. In Russia, China, Americans are pretty comfortable. Right, we've got our dollars. I have some Bitcoin friends who recently went to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network at the Treasury Department. They had a consultation with these guys, and the guys from FinCEN, who are regulating Bitcoin, they said to the Bitcoin guys, they said, "Look, there's just something we just don't understand. What is it that people don't like about dollars? Why do people even want it? What is the attraction? What's wrong with the current system?" I couldn't really get it.
You're like, where do I start?
Right. But a lot of Americans don't get it because you know what? We're included. We've got first world problems,
Exactly.
And so Bitcoin is maybe not all that compelling to people. Maybe it's not enough to make people change. I mean, for me, it's a thrill to use Bitcoin. I mean, I feel absolutely free. When my dollars get converted to Bitcoin, I can live in that space. I mean, it is just, I have a vision of what could be. But for a lot of people, a lot of Americans are not interested in doing the techie thing. Okay, fine. But all around the world, Bitcoin is catching on, just to such an extent.
Yeah. I had another question about Bitcoin. About when do you think that the exchange rate will kind of level off? I guess.
Well, Bitcoin's funny. That video about the honey badger.
Yeah.
I love that video. So Bitcoin is the honey badger of currencies, right? I mean, it just doesn't give a shit, right? So, right. So you never know.
I love that. It's so long since I've seen it.
So that's Bitcoin. But it's funny because people think they have Bitcoin figured out. Like it's going up, and then it stops going up. It's never going to go anywhere. A lot of the early miners sold at $1, right? Because it achieved dollar parity, and they said immediately, this is clearly a bubble, right? And they're selling hundreds of thousands of these things, Then, of course, it went to 14, and then it went to 30, and then it went to 266 and fell back down to 54. Now, but, it's funny, a few weeks ago, everybody said, well, the thing about Bitcoin is that it's really unstable. Well, as soon as you think you know something about Bitcoin, you stop knowing it, because it's been more or less stable, actually, for the last month. In fact, it's been almost boring. So Bitcoin, you just don't know. But I think that you look at the long-term trend. I mean, we have here a currency that is very strictly limited in its ultimate quantity. We'll all be dead when that day arrives. When the last Bitcoin is mined, we'll all be dead. But still, it cannot be inflated. So its value is definitely, its purchasing power is definitely headed up. But that much I think we can say for sure over the long term. Gosh, we could talk about Bitcoin all day.
We really could.
Regarding capitalism, one question that kind of brought to mind is that if anarchism is kind of against the majority against the minorities, how is your take on capitalism? Because it's kind of like you're voting with your wallet, and it's actually kind of making a majority choice. So how would you
well, the thing that always surprised me about capitalism is how it actually gives life to the weirdest niches, like even the smallest, tiniest niches. Like you think that capitalism is a majority rule, and certainly it is. Like if at some level, like most of the best-selling novels are all kind of crappy, because most people buy them. Whatever.
Twilight and Shades of Grey.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure Twilight is crappy. I'm not sure about Shades of Grey. I mean, haven't really tested it, but yeah, I don't know. But look, I mean, what's amazing to me is that capitalism gives you the freedom to not participate in that majority.
Right.
Culture. Yeah, and that's a great thing. So, like, I have very weird musical interests. I mean, truly. I mean, my interests are in Belgian composers from the 1530s. Well, I can actually download all the music I want by these guys, with the best performances in the world. Just me. I mean, if you can find a niche, you can sell it. There's a book a few years ago that came out by the editor of Wired, who seems to come out with one great book after another. It was about the long tail, Like the goal is not to sell shoes to Chinese, but to sell polyphonic music of the Renaissance to weirdos like me. That's where the money is, So it's true that you're going to, the majority will tend to dictate the most commonly available thing, but actually there are higher profits associated with selling to niches, even the smallest, weirdest ones.
Yeah.
So that's a very interesting feature of capitalism.
Yeah.
I mean, it serves minorities better than any other social system that's ever been invented in a way. I mean, it's extraordinary. Like everyone has a voice, no matter how odd your interest is. They'll find you can find a market for your product. It's, the magic of the commercial marketplace, it never ceases to amaze me. And I find it almost unfathomable. When I look out that window, even now, and look out over the city, Salt Lake, which people think of as being a relatively small place. I don't. I think it's just a universe unto itself.
Yeah.
And just try to conceive of every bit of commercial activity happening in just the space you can see with your eyes. It's not possible for one mind to even conceive of that. It's a beautiful
It's true.
thing. Yeah.
It is.
Now, one question, another one is the non-aggression principle is brought up a lot. And one objection to that is by a certain culture, which is vegetarians and vegans, is that do you think the non-aggression principle applies just to individual interactions or also animal rights?
Yeah, so I probably don't have a very compelling answer to that. I mean, I tend to, I think like all of us, think of humankind as being a special thing because of the presence of special kind of rationality and intergenerational learning that makes it different from all the things from which we evolved. Why that is true, I don't really know, but like animals are not very good at passing on information to future generations, for example.
Right, that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, like my dog doesn't save food for his children, and they save it for their children.
It's more instinct-based thing.
Yeah, and instinct is a funny word because we don't really even know what that means, really. And like we use that as a shorthand for somebody who don't entirely understand.
Yeah.
But the point is, I think that animals are substantially different from human beings in some robust way, having to do with rationality, planning, learning, and teaching. Over time. So we have the capability of progressing, which is a weird thing.
Yeah.
That's the unique feature of humankind, it seems to me, is our capacity for progress. And it's funny how we use states so often to kill that, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That's what states do. They cut off our ability to be, cool people, to do the thing that mankind was meant to do. This is progress.
Yeah.
But anyway, so maybe I don't have a very good answer. Murray used to say about animal rights, I'll grant their rights when they start protesting for them. This is a funny remark, but kind of, like maybe not the answer.
Yeah.
But I'm open to hearing anything about animal rights. I think just for our purposes, it's good to be sensitive to aspects of cruelty because it's kind of bad, especially for human beings, to be cruel to animals. And I think we need to go with our instincts about that. But it seems to be, I would definitely say that there seems to be in evolution a point in time where there was a distinct thing called mankind or humankind that emerged that is definitely different from anything that preceded it. And I'm not an evolutionary biologist, so I can't demonstrate that, but I think we have to, maybe as a matter of utility or whatever, just presume that that's true.
Yeah, and one thing I've always thought of was like taking the Ludwig von Mises approach, the action axiom, man acts, but then like comparing that with, if you look at animals, like if you say man acts, animals react. They act on instinct. They don't act on what should I do today. They think food, sleep, provide, care for my litter. My
it's
litter.
Funny though how we are so anxious, and I don't know why we do this, but we attribute human qualities to our pets in such a fun way, right? Like you get a little fish and it's like, good morning, Mr. Fishy. I see me. You want your breakfast today? I mean, maybe we don't all do that, but I mean, there is a tendency we have. I think it's just what we want. We want friends, and pets are wonderful friends for us. I even feel this way about chickens. I love all animals, but I also like to eat them. So, but that's just one thing that's cool about capitalism is how it separated the production of meat products from its consumption in a fundamental way.
Yeah.
And this happened basically in the early part of the 20th century, if you think about it. It really wasn't true before then with meat processing, meat packaging. And sure enough, that's when the big statist apologists came along, to say, oh, look at the terrible things in the meatpacking industry. Well, we don't want to look at the terrible things. Kind
of like the Upton Sinclair.
Which is a book of lies. From beginning to end, that horrible book is it just lies. The whole thing is a socialist. That book is disgusting. It still haunts us, 100 years later, right?
Yeah, it was extra credit in one of my English classes.
You had to read the damn thing?
Oh, no, it was extra credit, so I didn't read it.
Actually, people should read it to see how absurd,
I think I skimmed it. I skimmed it, and I read the Spark Notes. I was planning on taking the extra credit exam, but it was senior year, so I opted out. But anyways, do you have another question?
Go ahead.
Oh, I lost it. So.
One big question is, was implementing anarchy. As I was thinking about asking this, is before I before I was thinking about asking this when I found out about an interview, but then you came out with a quote saying that it's happens every single day.
Yes.
It was when that Salon piece came out about how come there's no libertarian governments or societies out there. But as far as implementing anarchism, how do you think that could be achieved, or is it something that can be implemented at all?
Well, I mean, can we get rid of the state? Absolutely, and I would push the button right now to do it. Will it happen? Yeah, it's a matter of prediction. Probably not. Governments are always around because people are, I mean, the world is filled with jerks, you know, who like to steal stuff and bonk people on the head and pretend to rule others, you know. I mean, the reason states exist is because, I think, there's all these quotes in history, like from the founding fathers, whatever. It's like, if men were angels, there wouldn't be governments. Well, we wouldn't need governments. So I think another way to put it is that if men weren't jerks, then they would never create governments, because it's the impulse to control and beat people up and steal people's stuff, to do bad things that causes governments to exist. The only thing that's distinct between a criminal organization and a government is that the government manages to get hold of the law and also the minds of the population and convince people that the state is actually doing a good thing, but it's no different from an evil criminal band. And if you did all the things the state does privately, you would be considered, you know, antisocial. So all states are antisocial. It's just that they sail under the cover of law because we accept Hobbes or we accept Rousseau or God knows why. It's just a big lie. So yeah, I would press that button like immediately tomorrow. But in a way, I think we all need to press that button in our own lives.
Yeah.
We need to kind of just presume that, remember that the reason I'm successful is not because of the state. The reason I do things, the reason I'm a good person is not because of the state. If I'm going to undertake successful activities in my life and make something of these short, tiny years I have in this world, I'm going to have to proceed on my own volition and plan and determine my own future regardless of what the state is doing. Don't let the state take away your rights. Sometimes we have to obey. A lot of times we have to obey. But there's no reason, if you get that nudge, just ignore it. Say, to hell with you. The state's nudging us a lot of the time. There's a lot of ways in which we can actually live our lives, live freer lives by our own choosing.
And that's when, that's actually sometimes when you actually get the objections, and which was kind of linked to another question I had, is one that you hear the most. But that's when we hear the objection the most of, what about the warlords taking over? If we get rid of the states, then we'll have the warlords take over and have another state.
Well, first states are warlords. I mean, in the first place, that's what they are. So if we can, if you get rid of the state and some little tiny states pop up that, you know, some would-be states, I would say that's actually an improvement, because at least they're not they haven't taken over the law yet. I mean, just by the very term warlords means that people generally just regard them as being a problem. Whereas states are more of a problem than warlords because they're legitimate. Yeah, they're more legitimate, which is even worse. You know, so whatever's wrong with warlords, at least people don't like them and vote for them and think they're going to save us.
Don't fix it.
But will there always be a threat of the state? Absolutely. You know, but that's why we need ideological change too. And people need to understand that essentially society is capable of its own self-management. That's, I think, the theme of liberalism. Always has been, and I think it's the core theme of anarchism.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, okay, one of my friends, kind of relates to this, but one of my friends, he's a real hardcore, like Lockean classical liberal.
Yeah.
And, you know, he loves Locke, and he actually works with me, and we enjoy getting in, you know, discussions with each other.
Oh, because of the labor theory,
pretty much is because of.
I was going to say labor theory value.
It was. It's more. The one reason I dislike Locke is mainly because of there's kind of a paradigm with libertarians, and it's Georgist and anarcho-capitalist, and Locke is invoked a lot in
for the liberty government
and property rights anyway.
Yeah.
Because they have a different. They distinguish differently as far as when it's your property.
Right.
And there's the Lockean proviso and
well, I can only say every time I've read Locke, I've found him alternatively. I mean, sometimes it's exciting when he talks about the dispensability of the state.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, he wrote the sentences that became the Declaration of Independence.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
But otherwise, he's sort of puritanical, actually. I mean, sort of old world purist in a
Yeah.
weird way. I mean, his education book is kind of annoying, and so.
Yeah. Well, I was wondering, like, which do you think is more valuable for because Locke, you have Lockean property rights and the Lockean homesteading, and from there, you have, especially what Rothbard really expounded on, the natural rights concept, which that's really what appealed to me. That's what brought me to libertarianism, because I was kind of a right-wing neocon before, and then I always claimed to love liberty, and then I took it to its logical conclusion and ended up an anarchist. So I was wondering, because some people have said their conversion to liberty, or I guess deconversion from statism, it came from, like, some guys say it came from economics, some say it came from natural rights, and they always kind of reciprocate eventually, realize that the other is valuable. I guess, what's your opinion? What do you think is more valuable? I guess the natural rights concept of the state is inherently evil, or the economic standpoint that the state doesn't work?
I guess I wish there was a third alternative, because if you say economics, people say, well, look, there's more to life than economics. And if you say it's natural rights, then you say, well, not everything could be as morally pure as you think it should be. To me, the embrace of anarchism is essentially the embrace of reality, and nothing other than that. I mean, anarchism is what makes the world work. I mean, the capacity of people to cooperate with each other to their mutual benefit is the source of all the beautiful things in our lives. And if we just reflect on that, I think anarchism is, yes, it takes a long time to arrive at this conclusion, but it's inevitable. I see state as the great external, the great exogenous force that's out there doing nothing at all except sapping the energy out of society, reverting progress. I mean, it's throwing us back in every conceivable way, doing stupid things to us that we would otherwise never do to ourselves, that we could otherwise manage. And so to me, to embrace anarchism, yes, it's moral, yes, it's economically more efficient and makes more sense, but to me it's just a matter of coming to terms with reality all around us and just embracing it and going, yeah, I want to live a free life, because all the great things in my life are a consequence of the parts of my life that are free. So it's just free up the whole of life, and we'll see even better things.
I think deep down, everyone is an anarchist in some way.
So.
And whenever I talk to people that are actual advocates of government, when you take apart their sophisms, when you take apart, the moral injustices that they do, their real argument, which is not really an argument at all, is that it exists, and other countries have it, and it's been around for a long time.
The state.
Yes, that's their only argument. And it's not a justification, it's more of a logical fallacy.
So I think it's funny, because you could say the same thing about murder and theft.
Exactly.
There are terrible things that exist, but we should want to get rid of them.
If murder exactly. It's like, if murder and rape are so bad, how come there aren't countries without murder and rape?
Exactly.
You could break it down.
It's always a regrettable thing. It was especially regrettable that it's difficult to lodge, because what makes the state different from the rest of life? It's because the state follows its own law. It doesn't even have to obey the laws it imposes on us.
Or it changes them, so then it's legal.
Right. This occurred to me the first time I ever saw a policeman double parked. I thought, you son of a bitch. You can't even get a ticket for that. Doesn't that sum up the state?
Yeah. Pretty much. That's when you're talking about that, most people are anarchists, they all want to reach the same ends.
Sure.
I heard, reminds me of a Milton Friedman quote I heard. Obviously don't agree with his methodology, but he said it was in his what was it, that series he did, forgot what.
Free to Choose.
Free to Choose, that's right.
Yes.
And someone was talking about, I think the topic was he was arguing against right to work, or equal pay, equal work laws, and he said, some woman was arguing with him, and he said, well, I agree with you, but you don't, because they both want to reach the same ends, but he's saying what you're saying will reach it will hurt you. It will not help you.
That series is
And-
so wonderful, isn't
yeah.
it? Free to Choose. I
I
think
really
it
like it.
really holds up after all this time.
Yeah.
Except the section on the Great Depression. Everything else is great.
Yeah.
We go with Rothbard on that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I go with Rothbard a little bit more on that too, and that's also one thing that we haven't talked about, but that I really like that we talked about earlier was the cult personality. Was Milton Friedman. I discovered him before Rothbard, and I discovered Ron Paul before Milton Friedman. But I like what you said earlier when we're downstairs about
Yes, we had a secret conversation downstairs, didn't we?
Yeah, taking
A
bits
secret
and pieces from people and kind of making them your own,
Sure.
but not holding on to just one particular thing.
Well, I think it's especially important for libertarians. I mean,
Oh,
we are not inclined, I think, by just by temperament and by intellectual understanding, to want to follow one single thinker as being somehow the infallible God of all of our opinions. I mean, it would actually be impossible to do that anyway, because the human mind isn't constructed that way. When I read Hayek, I hear one thing in my head, you hear something differently. And I don't know if you've had this experience, probably not, but I've read books, one day and then picked them up again 5 years later, and seems like I've read something completely different.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like you get different information out of it. I mean, we pull things out of information that, depending on what we bring to it. That's the beauty of the human mind. It's always changing. So even if you try to adopt a person's thought entirely, I think it's metaphysically impossible to do that. And it's even more ridiculous to say, well, what would so-and-so do if he were here? Well, okay, that's a fun game to play, but you wouldn't. There's no way to know.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, even the greatest thinkers you could possibly ever think of were evolving throughout their lives. St. Thomas, Mises, Aristotle, Murray Rothbard, they were always changing and improving throughout their lives. And then, damn it, if one day they died. That's terrible. They died. It stopped them from being able to progress any further. And we're only left with an archive of what they thought up to that time. But one thing you can presume is that any serious thinker will continue to evolve. If he had continued to live, he would have continued to change his mind and develop his thought as time went on. So it's presumptuous, really, for us to just grab somebody from history and go, I think I know what Menger would say. You don't know. There's no way to know.
Yeah.
And besides, it doesn't really matter. What you want to do is extract the best of thought, by which I mean the stuff that you find most compelling from every tradition, every thinker that you could possibly find, turn it over in your own mind, and you need to make sense of the world for yourselves. Everyone needs to do this. And if you do this, you might find that you've come up with something new.
I think I just appreciated Keynes more now, just because you said
It's possible. We have been anarcho-Keynesians.
Anarcho-Keynesians. Go break those windows.
that's like a statist anarchist.
Wait, you mean anarcho-communism or
Something
syndicalism?
That's the weirdest. I have a hard time understanding anarcho-communism. And I don't care how many people try to explain it to me. Anarcho-socialism.
Yeah.
I never get it. And the reason is that, socialist theory doesn't really come to terms with the reality of scarcity. And that is just weird. It's like, that's the beginning of serious thought in the social sciences, I guess you could say, is to come to terms with the scarcity. If you haven't done that, then you really haven't taken that first step. Now, there is a realm that's non-scarcity. And it's a very wonderful realm. I think it's a realm we all love, and it's the world of ideas.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is the utopia of endless bounty for all. But unfortunately, the physical world has certain limitations that the world of ideas does not have, and we need to come to terms with that. It's the first step to thinking seriously about society.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's all the questions I have.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Okay.
Thanks for watching, everyone.
And we're going to end the broadcast now, right?
All right.
Okay.
Peace out.